Welcome back. All right, so on this NFL day where it's opening in the National Football League, I thought, well, what video would I like to do? I want to do the video that I've done before, previous seasons, on arguing for how any of the 32 teams can win the Stanley Cup. And I'm going to try to keep this as focused as possible. That's why there's actually names on the board this time. There's a reason some are in red and some are in blue. Although in some cases they're kind of interchangeable. So I do like using different colors. At any rate, since it's football day, I figured I'd wear a football jersey, so I threw on the Cleveland. It's a Beckham Jr. jersey. He's not in Cleveland. I know he's not in Cleveland. They didn't even have Cleveland written across the top now because they know where they play. So I've never understood the name of the city on the front. Like you're gonna go, hey, play for Cleveland apparently. Interesting. So that's why they keep calling me into the huddle. At any rate, I thought, why not go through all 32 teams? I've organized by division, but I've not gone alphabetical. We're starting with Vancouver. We're ending with Detroit. It was basically just which magnets I had handy and all that fun stuff. So we start with Vancouver. And for Vancouver to win a Stanley Cup this year, they're going to need to show that last year wasn't just a really strong first half. And they're going to need to show that they can put in the work necessary to do it in back-to-back years. I think winning the division is important. Finishing first overall obviously is considered an impediment, but winning your division is not. You can win your division and still win a Stanley Cup. And I think Quinn Hughes, I think there's a 100-point season there for him at some point, and maybe it's this season. And Quinn Hughes is one of those defensemen that I do think at some point wins the Stanley Cup, and I really hope it's in Vancouver. Now, Demko's in blue because obviously with Demko and all the knee discussions around Demko and everything, I'm not going to get into it here. But to me, Demko's the one that is kind of a variable here as to how effective he's going to be in all this. But if he can play as well as we know that he can this coming season, if he can fight through whatever's going on with his knee, he could be a huge part of a Stanley Cup win for Vancouver. For Vegas, Mark Stone, I think, is the most important guy here. Now, everybody, LTIR. If he goes on LTIR, they miss the playoffs. So I really believe that this season. I think Stone's position in Vegas is more important now than ever. With the exit of Marchessault, they don't have the luxury of being able to have Stone on LTIR injured or not. Whatever you think of the LTIR usage by Vegas and all that fun stuff. Adin Hill, can Adin Hill have another run like he did in the 2023 playoffs? I think it's a valid question to ask, and if he can, then they can win another Stanley Cup. But Vegas is going to be an interesting one to watch. Seattle, it's tough to argue one for Seattle, right? It's only their fourth year. They've only made the playoffs once in those 3 years. But Matty Beniers has that complete game. When he's on, when he's playing well, I think he's one of the better complete young players in the game. And so Matty Beniers, I think, is that key guy for Seattle, that if he starts really, really well in October, and if the team rallies around him, you just never know. And the addition of Montour is one. We don't know when a player goes to a new organization how well they're going to play, but Montour has the Stanley Cup. So does Chandler Stevenson. I thought about putting him up there as well. But if Montour can play as well in Seattle as he did in Florida, they've definitely got something going on there. The LA Kings, I think Byfield is going to be a big part of what they do if they do win a Stanley Cup. I think that he showed in the second half of 2022-2023 and then most of this past season just how good he can be, and I don't think we've seen his best as of yet. And how much longer can Drew Doughty be a top two defenseman in the National Hockey League? His play, if he plays the way that, again, we know that he can, could go towards maybe the LA Kings going on a run, maybe winning a Stanley Cup. Again, it's about me trying to make an argument for every team, which is why San Jose being on the board becomes a big challenge. Macklin Celebrini, if he has an absolutely insane rookie season in the National Hockey League, sure. Maybe San Jose makes a push. I've got a Skarov on the board too because, and today they were doing a goalie meet and greet for Sharks, and it was Vanacek and Blackwood. So clearly the plan is to have Vanacek and Blackwood as their goaltending tandem for this season. But if Askarov wedges himself in there and plays well, you just never know. Young goaltenders have gone on runs as rookies before, thinking of Cam Ward, Patrick Waugh, goalies of this nature. The Anaheim Ducks, it's not easy to make the argument for the Ducks either. Why, yes, it is a brand new magnet. Glad you asked. But Leo Carlsson could be that ace in the hole for them. He had a good rookie season. The stats don't jump off the page, but he is their future up front. And Zegras. If Zegras has the kind of bounce back season that I think a lot of people are hoping for from him, if he's staying in Anaheim, and I haven't heard anything recently about any kind of trade with Zegras, I think he could be a big part of this. So Anaheim would need to, along with San Jose, they'd have to go on incredible runs no one's expecting. But if you're following the year by year videos I've been doing on the NHL's history, it does happen. We do see teams that are expected to be at the bottom that end up making the playoffs, and teams we expect to see in the playoffs end up at the bottom. The Edmonton Oilers, Leon Draisaitl, like McDavid's the easy answer, but I think Draisaitl with the brand new contract, and we know how well Draisaitl can play. If he can really anchor his own line, and if you can keep McDavid and Draisaitl apart all season, and then throw out a playoff run and have it where you have to shut down two different scoring lines for Edmonton, I think that could be huge. And Darnell Nurse, for all the hate that Nurse gets for his contract, I think he can be a good defenseman. And if Nurse goes out there and plays the way that he did before he got the contract, I'm not saying that it was necessarily worthy of the cap hit. Again, whole other discussion for a whole other time. But Nurse can be a really good defenseman. It is a solid defense core that they have there. I think it's better than it gets credit for. And so Nurse might be one to watch there. For the Calgary Flames, the Flames, of course, look like they're in a rebuild. But when they won this past season, when they did well, it was Blake Coleman who was usually driving the bus. He was the one that was getting them over that finish line and getting them those wins. Coleman could be the one to keep an eye on this season. And Connor Zary. They're going to need goals. They've lost a lot of top-notch talent over the last 18 months. Zary doing well, I think, would go a long way. But for the Flames, it's hard to make that argument for a Stanley Cup. And the goaltending is definitely one that you look at there and you go, well, you got Vladar, you got Wolf. Both relatively young goaltenders. Vladar, obviously, the older of the two. And Wolf still on that, trying to learn at the NHL level. But as I mentioned with Askarov, you can be a good young rookie goaltender and go on a run in the playoffs. So it's hard to make an argument for the Flames as a team. Same as Anaheim and San Jose. But again, the season hasn't been played yet. For the New York Rangers, as we get over to the Metro Division, Artemi Panarin makes a ton of money in terms of cap hit. So eating up as much cap as he does, coming off of a 49-goal season, maybe he pushes over 50 this year, and then it's a matter of that game translating into the playoffs, right? Being able to score in the playoffs at least near the same rate as he does during the regular season. If he can get that done, if he can fight through the checking in the playoffs, maybe the Rangers win that cup this year. And obviously, Igor Shesterkin, the reason that I have him in blue rather than red is his contract status at this point. Who knows? Maybe this video going live means all of a sudden we'll hear Igor sign an extension with the Rangers and it won't be a problem. But it can at times loom over a player when you don't know if he's going to sign a contract with that team or not. So Igor is the guy in net right now for the Islanders, and he is a superstar goaltender, but he is in the final year of a contract. The Philadelphia Flyers, I think Konechny's their best forward, and I think that if this team is going to overachieve and make the playoffs and then go on some kind of unexpected run, I think it's going to revolve around Konechny, but it's also going to need Couturier to, again, play better than he did this past season. And, I mean, I don't have coaches on the board because I feel like that's just this whole unknown too, but Tortorella clearly would have to get this team to play a very suffocating style of hockey and have it where they don't look as exhausted as they did at points this past season. And I did not feel like I didn't feel like there was anything there to pick at the team about, like, oh, look, they're tired. It was an exhausting style of hockey they were playing. Totally understand why towards the end of the season it got more and more difficult for them to sustain it. The New York Islanders, Noah Dobson. He took that step last season. I think he's going to have to take maybe a little bit more of a step offensively, show he's, the all-around defenseman that he's expected to be, and could be key to a team going into a playoff round and maybe going on a run. But Bo Horvat, they're paying Horvat the big dollars. He takes faceoffs. He's expected to be a leader. Horvat is due for some kind of a run in a playoff series / in this case, arguing for a Stanley Cup. Who knows? Maybe the Islanders get that first Stanley Cup since '83, and Horvat holds up a cup, and everywhere Canuck fans say, great, perfect, fantastic. For Columbus, I think it's going to be Fantilli that's the key guy there. So yesterday when I did the preview, I moved Fantilli to the wing, and I did that for a simple reason. There are good young players who learn to play center by starting on the wing. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean you're not still taking faceoffs. The most obvious examples to me personally, having watched hockey growing up, Mark Messier started on the wing for the Oilers. Once he moved to center, it was seamless. And Trevor Linden, who was billed as a center, was actually started on the wing for the Canucks and eventually transitioned to center. There's a lot more responsibility to being a center than being a winger. And I think with a young player coming into the league, sometimes it's better to give them that spot on the wing, get them comfortable, get them up to speed, and get them those points. And so maybe Fantilli starts there. Maybe he's on a line where he sometimes takes the face-off, sometimes doesn't. But Fantilli is, I think, the key guy, especially in light of what's happened this summer. Now, Monahan. Monahan's the great unknown here because we haven't seen him play in Columbus yet. The player who he was brought in to play with, tragically, will not be playing for the team. So, what is Monahan? How will his numbers look? Who will he play with? If Monahan uses this to play the best hockey he has in a long time, if he uses this as an inspiration, and I mentioned this in the season preview for Columbus yesterday, it could be a dangerous team, and Monahan could be a real driving force behind that. So, I think Columbus could be an interesting story this season. For Pittsburgh, it kind of has to be Crosby, doesn't it? And I kind of felt like maybe Crosby belonged in the blue ink rather than the red ink because of his current contract situation. It's up at the end of this season, but I still think Crosby is the guy. He is one of the best forwards in the National Hockey League, one of the best all-around players. According to the NHL players, he is the best all-around forward in the game. Their words, so I trust them on that. And Crosby, absolutely fantastic talent. I think still capable of another Stanley Cup run. And Letang I've got here in blue. You always have an injury concern with Letang. You always have a concern about, and age is a concern now with some of these players, including Letang. Letang coming off of what was a pretty strong season this past year. If he has another really strong season, maybe if this team gets above the playoff line, that core can rally and go on a run in the playoffs. For New Jersey, the Hughes brothers are on the board here. New Jersey, of course, having a pretty rough season this past year. And there are many who are taking them to win the Stanley Cup. But Jack Hughes needs to stay healthy. That's step number one right there, which is sometimes easier said than done. And Luke Hughes, who had a pretty strong rookie season, is going to have to get, I think, a little bit better defensively. And that just comes with time very often with young defensemen. It's nothing to be concerned about when a rookie defenseman comes up and their defense isn't necessarily fantastic. When they're an offensively minded defenseman, that's pretty standard. I think fans are a lot more critical now of young players than what they were before. I'm always amazed how people will say, well, look at this guy, and they'll show charts of two players next to each other, and they'll be comparing somebody who's got 60 games of NHL experience to somebody with 600, and doing it unironically. Like, well, look, this guy's so much smarter than this guy is, and look at his plus, look at the underlying numbers. This veteran is so much better than this rookie. Yeah, because he's a rookie. He's still learning. Yeah, of course, that makes total sense. The rookie needs to play through some of that. So, at any rate, Luke Hughes, I think, has all the potential in the world. His last name is Hughes. All three Hughes brothers are on the board, and there's good reason for that. Washington, it is Ovi, isn't it? It's going to revolve around Ovi again. And if the Capitals are going to go on a run and win a Stanley Cup, it very well will likely come down to Ovechkin and what he's able to do. Now, one underrated part of the Washington Capitals, to me personally, again, is John Carlson. And John Carlson defying the aging process is important, while Ovechkin's doing his best to keep that at bay. So both Carlson and Ovechkin are going to need to keep their level of play really, really high. And as you get into your late 30s, that gets more difficult to do. So we'll see how that turns out. But for the Caps, that's what I think it's going to revolve around. For Carolina, I got Svechnikov on the board because I still think Andrei Svechnikov is one of the most talented forwards in the National Hockey League whose production doesn't reflect that level of talent. He's a very good forward and he's productive. I think he's capable of more. I think Svechnikov's capable of a 40, 45 goal. Sure, why not 50 goal season? I think he's got that potential. I think he's got that level of talent. And for a Carolina team that has suffered some losses in the offseason, having Svechnikov turn that offensive gear on a little bit, I think would go a long way. Freddie Anderson I've got in the blue because we know he gets injured a lot. The thing with Anderson is that, or I should say often, a lot sounds more accident prone, I think, than often. But anyway, they're similar. They're similar to one another. But Freddie Anderson's a very good goaltender, but he needs to be healthy throughout this season. And then in the playoffs, they're going to need him to be able to ramp up his game, potentially against a guy like Shesterkin. So it's not easy, but that's what they're going to need. So now we go to the Central Division. I've got Yossi in the red ink here. I debated about Saros. You can throw Saros' name on the board, but Yossi, I think, is one of those defensemen capable of putting the team on his back, playing 30 plus minutes every playoff game, and getting himself into that Conn Smythe category. That being said, I've got Stamkos in blue. The only reason I don't have Stamkos in red is because it is his first year in Nashville. There's going to be some pressure there, and we do not know as of yet how he's going to play with new line mates and new teammates in a new location. For Colorado, it's the Nathan MacKinnon show. It is difficult for me to argue anybody else as being the guy who drives the boat for them. But in blue, you'll notice Gabriel Landeskog. In the event that Landeskog comes back early in the season and plays well and he's healthy, that is a huge boost for Colorado. That absolutely could make them the 2025 Stanley Cup champions. And we could be looking at this then and saying, so all right, so let's just say, let's go down that rabbit hole. The Colorado Avalanche win the Cup in 2025. Landeskog plays great. So with 2 Stanley Cups in the last 2 years that they'd had Landeskog in the lineup, could you then argue that he's that fringe Hall of Fame at that point, where you go, you know what, there's a cup, there's multiple Stanley Cups there, and his return clearly got them to that second Stanley Cup. You're then getting into that range where if he has a really strong run or two after that, yeah, then you could make that argument for a Hall of Fame spot. For Winnipeg, it's got to be Hellebuck. Like, well, I could almost argue a goaltender for every single team and make this a really easy list. I'm going with Hellebuck for Winnipeg because it has to be. And playoff Hellebuck has to be a little better. I could almost have put Hellebuck in blue because of playoff Hellebuck. Although he's still, last time he was asked about it, he believed he was playing the best hockey he had in his career in that series against Colorado. So that just tells you Colorado had a book on him. That's what that says. Morrissey, on the other hand, Morrissey's the one that I think if he can raise his game in the playoffs to the same level it's been at certain points during the regular season, Josh Morrissey has every bit as much talent as any of the defensemen in the National Hockey League. And so, yeah, Morrissey could be that guy. For Ottawa, it's a goalie as well, Jake Ottinger. Ottinger, who can be hot and cold, and I've mentioned this before during the regular season, that's a common part of his game, that he's a little better at certain points than at others, but it does feel like Dallas should win a Stanley Cup in the next few seasons here, and Ottinger could be a huge part. Now, I got Jamie Benn underneath because he's been captain of Dallas forever, it seems. He has had issues in the playoffs in raising his game and some key moments that really stand out, and sometimes are that game that decides that Dallas does not move on and win a Stanley Cup. So Jamie Benn is going to need to, just make that improvement and make that adjustment. And at this stage of his career, it gets a little more difficult. Chicago, it is almost impossible to argue Chicago for a Stanley Cup, but you do have Connor Bedard. You do have some other decent pieces on this roster, and maybe Tyler Bertuzzi can hit that next level offensively. Maybe if you have Bertuzzi on a wing with Bedard, let's say it's Bertuzzi with Bedard and Taylor Hall. That's not a bad line, and if Hall's 100% and able to produce, they might surprise some people. So I don't know if I can argue Stanley Cup, but it is going to come down to Bedard's going to have to put the team on his back. He's very strong in the lower body. I don't know if he's strong enough to carry the whole team, but we shall see. In St. Louis, it's Binnington. Going back to another goaltender, it's Binnington. I was going to put Thomas, and I thought, no, Thomas is a great passer and all, but no, if they're going to win another Stanley Cup, Binnington's going to have to get in the Wayback Machine and find that 2019 game and drag him there. And then in blue, I put Kyrou, because Kyrou's coming off of an up and down year. Pretty strong second half. If he has the kind of season we know that he can, I think Kyrou is a playoff performer. I think like Jordan Kyrou before this past season, where some of that shine came off of his game, honestly, just supremely talented. Most fans were really sold on his game and how good he was. So Kyrou would have to be a key guy, I would think, if St. Louis went on a cup run. Minnesota, stop laughing. Anybody can win it. And I know the laughter will probably be when I hit that fourth column, won't it? But Kaprizov's the man. He just is. And if Minnesota's going to do this, Kirill the Thrill's the guy's going to drag him there. But don't forget, Marc-Andre Fleury, final season, Maybe. We'll see if it actually is. If he wins the Stanley Cup, maybe not, right? Or maybe so. Maybe you ride off into the sunset with the Stanley Cup on your on the back of your horse. But Marc-Andre Fleury is, to me, the ultimate wild card for this team. If he can put together a really strong season, especially if Gustafsson can't bounce back from what was a down year for him this past year, Fleury could be huge for them. And Utah. Utah has, again, no pressure, none. No expectations, and now they don't have any concerns off the ice. They can just go out there and play. Clayton Keller's a megastar in this game. If he can put everything together at the same time, I think he has that potential. So Keller's the guy for me, and Sergachev. How's Sergachev going to play outside of Tampa? Is he going to be a number one defenseman? Can he run the defense? I think he can. I think he showed that potential in Tampa, although he still had Hedman there, right? That definitely helps. But we'll see what happens with Sergachev, but it should be fascinating. And that brings me over to the Atlantic Division. Nick Suzuki, to me, is the guy. He's the straw that stirs the drink. You can make the argument for Caulfield, yes. I've got Line A in blue because how Line A plays, and if he can get back to his 30-plus goal pace, or even a 40-goal pace, this could be a huge boost for the Montreal attack and could put them above the playoff line. I'm not as sold on this being the difference maker that's going to get them in the playoffs as some Habs fans that I've seen. But they're going to be in the conversation. They should be closer to a playoff spot this year than they have been recently. And so we'll see how it all goes. But Nick Suzuki, I think he has a really solid game. I would put Suzuki and Beniers into that same category. Strong young forwards who have some great two-way game there, right? Definitely have that. For Toronto, the captain and the former captain, Tavares in red, or Tavares in blue, Matthews in red. We know Matthews can score during the regular season. We know he will. We know Tavares is coming off of a down year. And Tavares, the advanced stats would tell you, Tavares had a pretty good year. He just didn't have any puck luck. Now, he's also in the final year of a contract, which can be distracting. But if Toronto's going to go on a run and get to a Stanley Cup, Matthews is going to be the guy that's scoring the goals for them. And Tavares could go a long way towards either getting an extension from Toronto or finding somebody who's willing to offer him a ton of money that summer in the event that he leaves as a UFA. So while I know that there's a lot of mockery around the Toronto Maple Leafs, I totally understand it. I totally get it. The reality is that if this team goes on a run and wins the Stanley Cup, I think Matthews is going to be a huge part of it. In Ottawa, Linus Ullmark. They didn't bring in Ullmark because they plan to miss the playoffs. They brought in Ullmark because the plan is to make the playoffs and maybe go some distance once they get there. I think Ullmark can be a good playoff goaltender. To be honest, his time in Boston, we didn't really see a run from Ullmark at all. And his numbers in the playoffs, not necessarily fantastic. But again, a change of scenery to Ottawa could help him there. Ottawa's going to have to make the playoffs, of course. But this is about how all 32 teams win the Stanley Cup. And in blue ink for Ottawa, I went with Jake Sanderson. Sanderson's contract extension, when he signed it last summer, I defended it. I still will. I still think he's worth every penny. And maybe this year he shows it. And if he can take Ottawa on a ride all the way to the Stanley Cup, I think Ottawa fans would be pretty excited. I would be over the moon with that, to be honest. In Tampa, it's Kucherov. Kucherov. Regardless of how many points he gets during the regular season, in the postseason, we know what Kucherov can do. He's shown it. And so I think a lot of it's going to revolve around him, especially with the exit of Steven Stamkos. Gensel's going to score the points, but from a leadership perspective and in big games in the playoffs, I think more of that mantle drops now onto Kucherov to get that done than necessarily Jake Guentzel would pick up. I do expect Guentzel to score, but in those key moments in a big game, Kucherov could be the guy. And Hedman, really strong bounce back year offensively from what was kind of a down year in 2022-2023 offensively. Can he do it again? And he is at that point in his career where it's a valid question to ask. He is a veteran. He's been around the game for a very long time, so we shall see. In Florida, it's Barkov. I think with Barkov, and I mean, realistically, I think the funniest thing about Barkov was, when I was watching Jurassic Park the other night, I was like, I don't remember the scene where Barkov wrestled the T-Rex down with one arm. But he did. Sasha Barkov wrestled down a T-Rex with one arm. And then drop-kicked all the Raptors and saved everybody. Barkov is, and may very well be, superhuman. But at any rate, Barkov is the guy, all kidding aside. He is the guy for Florida. We know this. And Bobrovsky. So talking about Hedman getting up there in age a little bit. Bobrovsky as well. He's a goaltender, but once you get in your mid-30s, you never know. There's going to be a drop-off at some point. Maybe this is the year for Bobrovsky. If he can hold that off, maybe they win the Stanley Cup yet again. Boston, it's all about Pastrnak up front. It really is. I'd love to have had Swayman's name up there, but he's not even signed. So, but yeah, Pasternak's the guy up front. And in blue, I've got Marchand. Marchand had a bit of a drop offensively. Now, hearing about all the surgeries he needed to have in the offseason, I suddenly understand why he was having more trouble with the scoring side of things this past year. But he's going to need to, avoid injury, and he's going to need to have a little bit of a bounce back offensively, because Boston's a little thin in the top 6 in terms of those really talented point-producing forwards. So, yeah. And honorable mention to Elias Lindholm as well, because he's coming off of a bit of a down year. And so they paid a lot of money for him. We shall see. In Buffalo, Rasmus Dahlin, I think despite adding Byram, who's an excellent young defenseman, Owen Power being a number 1 draft pick who has a ton of potential and talent as well, the defense is going to revolve around Dahlin. If they're going to win a Stanley Cup, I think Dahlin's going to be the one that's driving it right down the middle of the ice. And Alex Tuch, for me, there's blue for Alex Tuch, part of the Golden Knights that were the Golden Misfits. And Tuch coming off of a year offensively that was a little down from the previous year. Maybe he has that bounce back again. Buffalo's going to want that bounce back in goals and the goals against to stay down. And then just math tells you they're a playoff team. And in Detroit, Dylan Larkin, the captain, he's the guy who drives the boat for them. So Larkin's, everybody's driving somewhere. That's how this works. But yeah, Larkin's the guy. It's straw that stirs the drink too. So you're either a straw, or you're on the boat, or you could be various things. Yeah, heck, they could be a Transformers. He's Optimus Prime. He's their Optimus Prime. That's another video idea. Which hockey players would make the best Transformers? Anyways, that being said, this was put together so I wouldn't sidetrack. Remember, Moritz Seider. So he's not signed, same as Swayman. However, if Detroit's going to go on a run and win a Stanley Cup, the number 1 thing you need for Stanley Cup. And people will argue goaltending, which is fair, but I think having that top 2-minute defenseman, that guy that you can count on all the time, the guy who can play 35 plus minutes in an overtime game, and just there's no stop, there's no quit. If Seider can be that guy, then he will live up to the billing that a lot of Red Wings fans feel like he already should have, that he should be seen as a top 15, top 20 defenseman in the whole league. So some pressure on Seider there, but I think if they're going to win a Stanley Cup, I think he needs to be one of those top defensemen. He needs to be able to shut down the top guys on the other team and get the points for his team as well. So there you go. Just a fun video idea I figured for today, but let me know your thoughts. And who do you think is the key guy if any of these teams are going to win a Stanley Cup? Who do you think the key player is? And I don't think there's a wrong answer here, although I look forward to people telling me why I'm wrong in the comment section, because that's why it's there. But thank you guys so much for all your support. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I hope people enjoyed the opening night of the National Football League's Sunday schedule. Yeah, it was a busy Sunday. I guess just Sunday schedule. Shouldn't say Sunday night because it started in the morning. But at any rate, let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.